Okay, hello everyone. February 25th, 2000, or maybe 26th, sorry, 2020 here on the Diplomatic Back Channel, not far from where Bill Colby made that last canoe ride. So sometimes there is metadata in them thar torpedoes. There's metadata in the torpedoes. In any kind of battle situation, when somebody fires a torpedo or let's say a Tomahawk cruise missile, both being developed right across the Potomac that way, there's metadata. The location of who's firing at you is probably the most important metadata, but then you can also, if you keep looking at the metadata of who's firing at you, let's say it's Peter Strzok firing at you with a Club K cruise missile, you can say, hey, I recognize that Club K cruise missile. That's Peter Strzok. That's the cutout. That's Cruise and Associates. That's in Yorktown, Virginia. Hey, I recognize this. I know the whole Club K story. That's a joint venture between some Navy intel guys, some Army intel guys, and some Russians called Rosbaron Export to basically have a market in covert cruise missiles. It's a covert cruise missile, folks. That's what it is. It's missile in a box. That's their name for it. Well, our good friend Peter Strzok used to be in cyber hacking, cyber warfare in the Army. The Army was looking at that for missile in a box. They chose the Raytheon solution. The Navy came up with the waterborne missile in a box in a shipping container. That would make sense. That left that intellectual property available after 11 years of DARPA development and the American people putting money into it. So hey, there's Club K. Why not do a joint venture with this group, and we'll sell a lot of missiles. I'll be Cruise and Associates. We'll sell the missiles to the Pacific Fleet at Cruise Pacific. Cruise and Associates Pacific will sell all kinds of stuff. They sell helicopters. Gee, that's convenient because my dad worked if I'm Peter Strzok, my dad worked in a helicopter factory in Isfahan in Iran. Remember, that's how I learned how to speak Farsi. So just by getting one missile shot at you, there's a tremendous amount of metadata that you can learn. It unravels. I mean, sometimes I think the conspirators here are trying to get caught, trying to unravel because the metadata is so voluminous. Sometimes I just can't believe it. So who shot the latest missile at George Webb and the people here on our channel? Well, you guessed it, it's a Navy guy. It's a Navy Reserve guy. He spent a lot of years in the Navy, and he spent a lot of years with Tomahawk missiles. He did a lot of the planning, or he was on several different ships that were surface warfare ships that fired cruise missiles, Tomahawk missiles, into Kosovo, if you remember that, I believe. And his name's Ken Hale, an interesting guy. He's followed our channel for a while. But all of a sudden, just recently, when I started bringing out these connections between Pete Buttigieg and Peter Strzok, remember, the Strzok's, both senior and junior, were big backers through Dennis McDonough, the chief of staff of Obama. They were big backers of Obama. When Obama was asked who was going to win the election, who would be the next person they would consider as a big front runner, he named an unknown mayor at that time from South Bend, Indiana, the Golden Dome up there at Notre Dame. He named a pretty unknown guy as a presidential contender. Everybody said, who the heck is Pete Buttigieg? So you just wonder, as soon as you go into the waters, let's say the channel here connecting, let's say this channel connects Buttigieg Bay over here to Strzok Harbor over here, all of a sudden the torpedoes start coming. It immediately makes you think that there's somebody who is out there firing almost, as a friend or something more, to fire torpedoes at us if you get close to Pete Buttigieg, especially if you get close to connecting them, Pete Buttigieg and Peter Strzok together in Africa, especially in Africa. Now this person, Ken, he's got an interesting background. He was at Camp Lemonnier, which is in Djibouti. Not a lot of people in America know where Djibouti is. I happen to live a year and a half in Capitol Heights, Washington, near Washington, near the border of Washington, D.C. in Capitol Heights, Maryland. And every day, our cab drivers were either, my Lyft drivers were either from Djibouti, Eritrea, Ethiopia, or Somalia. Sometimes every once in a while, we'd get a Sudanese. So I ended up learning an awful lot about where the Navy bases were in all of these countries, where the key airports were, the covert airports like KS-50 in Somalia, how the, Task Force Orange was there. So I had a kind of a daily dose, if you will. Maybe, when you meet someone, it really does hammer home the stuff that you're reading and learning on the internet. It's kind of like an immediate check on the internet, if you will. So I was interested because this guy was in the Horn of Africa. Thank you for your service, Ken. And he, he seemed to be saying, whatever, at all costs, do not connect Pete Buttigieg with Africa. Now, he's from Norfolk. He has currently got a Hale and Associates type private security firm. I believe he does electronic security, sort of like Task Force Orange used to do. But electronic security, operational security, information assurance, that type of thing. Probably defense against cyber hacking and other things. I don't know what all Hale does, but he's a very knowledgeable guy, and he's obviously served our country. But he was also in the State Department. He was a liaison to the country of Djibouti. Now, this is a country that has a long history of money laundering and a long history of dealing in illegal weapons. Because it's so small, the Horn of Africa, if you don't know Africa very well, I'll turn it around this way. Africa, the part that sticks out here with the horn, it looks like a rhinoceros horn, that's the Horn of Africa. And right there on the thumbnail, you've got 4 little tiny countries and one very badly war-torn country in Somalia. But you've got this little tiny country of Djibouti, a very small country of Eritrea. Now, why would Peter Strzok choose to target Djibouti or target an Eritrea? Because those are very easy governments to control. Those are very easy governments to do banking with. Those are very easy governments to launder money through. So getting a torpedo from Djibouti, a lot of people can't even find Djibouti on a map. But when you start getting torpedoes or missiles, Tomahawk cruise missiles from Djibouti, there's great metadata there. I mean, that's like a white chocolate covered crossbow in terms of metadata. I mean, there's not a lot of those in the world. So missiles from Djibouti are really interesting. And this is a State Department liaison level. He was a country manager. So if you're doing any kind of bringing, let's say, people from Somalia, let's say there's kids that you're putting it through school, Peter Strzok schools, and you want to kind of create a Milner's kindergarten, if you will. You want to raise the next set of diplomats like Obama. You would have some kind of structure, some kind of liaison between the U.S. State Department and the government of Djibouti, or the government of Eritrea, or the government of Ethiopia, etc. So it does very much bring out a part of history that is very pivotal to understanding how this money, I'm not associating this with Ken Hale in any way, but how the money of Iraq and how the money of Afghanistan was diverted to the Horn of Africa. And again, diverting it into a very small country like Djibouti, or what I say is Somalia, through some warlords in Somalia, is a way of draining the very large war budgets that are going into Iraq and into Afghanistan. If it was me, what I would do is I would have huge amounts of weapons, let's say missiles, sent to Iraq. I would have a guy like O'Day, a person in country, do Middle East trading, in some way get a hold of these missiles, somehow loosen these missiles from Iraq, and then fly them down under the auspices of a Task Force Orange top secret program, fly them down to a secret air base called KS-50 in the southern part of Somalia. I'd load up, and then I would trade these weapons. I'd give these weapons to warlords that I was helping finance in the drug business. Now, I'm not saying that Pete Buttigieg is doing that with the finance cell that he was in, the Afghan finance cell. But what I am saying is, this Ken Hale said, well, produce for me some evidence that Buttigieg was in the Horn of Africa. Produce some evidence that he was in Africa. You can't produce what they call a fitness report. Fitness report is basically your assignment, your orders, basically. And I produced 4 of them. Again, four requisitions, if you will, that say Buttigieg was in Africa as an intelligence officer, surveillance. Ken Hale is very adept in doing surveillance from the air and interpretation of the geographic data from surveillance from the air. So weather, also being able to spot targets, also being able to do things like mining, water tables, you name it. A lot of very top-notch geospatial guy, right? So you're dealing with an expert here when you're talking about Ken Hale. Again, it's just a trove of metadata. Sometimes I think, are they trying? Is this their way of confessing, or is this somebody dropping breadcrumbs for me to say, it's in Norfolk, dude, don't you remember you did all those shows about General Grange, and there's a plan for Tripoli? Don't you remember David Petraeus sending that email to from Sid Blumenthal with the plan to take Tripoli? Don't you remember the mech war strategy that with all the mechanized drones and all the mechanized kinetic launchers for Javelin missiles? Didn't you pay attention to your own shows? That's where we did it. We did it out of Norfolk, the port of Norfolk. Well, yeah, I did. And Cindy Grange runs the port of Norfolk. So sometimes I do kind of think, why are you making this easy? But that's okay. There's got to be a good reason, so I'm going to keep going. So anyway, the objection to me was, well, show me the 4 fit reps, they call it fit reps, fitness reports, that put Pete Buttigieg in Africa. And I immediately produced 4. There's only one small slice of time that he, yeah, there you go. Here we go. There's only one small slice of time, right? Sorry about that. There's only one small slice of time that he spent in Afghanistan. Again, this is not speculation. This comes right from the 22-page report about Pete Buttigieg's career. Why is Pete Buttigieg hiding this? Pete Buttigieg himself says he speaks 7 languages, one of them being in Arabic, that he's expert in. He's from Malta. That's where he grew up. I would assume he speaks the European languages, which would be Italian. He's close to Italy and Malta. He's close to France and Malta. I would assume he speaks French. We know he speaks English, so those are 3. So Pete, all you have to do is come up with the other 4 languages. Well, we know Arabic's one of them, so now you're down to 3. Does he speak Urdu? Does he speak Farsi? What are the languages he speaks? This is somebody who is already probably hacked with his software, this shadow software that he's involved in, already hacked the Iowa election. He's in South Carolina right now in yet again another election. You don't know what he's doing. We have the footprints, the smoking gun already from Iowa, that he's involved in this sort of shadow hacking. So we have to take this seriously. Will I go? I'm perfectly willing, Ken, if you're out there listening, to come down to Norfolk tomorrow and interview you and explain how you're so sure, given your clearances and so forth, that right now, Pete Buttigieg never stepped foot in Africa. Geez, Malta's awfully close to Libya. It's not very far. Somebody might want to post how far Malta is from Libya. I find it very difficult to believe. I have posted Pete Buttigieg's being at the language school, the bourgeois or the bourget or whatever it is in Tunis, graduating there before he goes on to Oxford. So we know Pete Buttigieg has been to Tunisia. They speak French there and they speak Arabic there at the language school. Again, why would this person say there's no fit reps when I'm showing him 4 fit reps, fitness reports, when I'm showing him 4 fit reps where it says Pete Buttigieg was in Africa and he was in formerly Yugoslavia. Now, former Yugoslavia, you could say, well, maybe that's Macedonia because George Papadopoulos is trying to put a pipeline through Macedonia. Mark Kulak did a great show on that. Or you could say, hey, wait a minute. Like Ken Hale told me himself, I was the guy who was loading the Tomahawk missiles on these guided missile cruisers, firing them into till we ran out of Tomahawk missiles into Kosovo. So would there be, from a large U.S. presence there, would there be a cache of weapons there left over from that huge interaction? Remember, at that time, Peter Strzok is in the West Wing of the White House. He's there the day they signed the Brady Bill, right? He's in the West Wing of the White House in some capacity, either FBI counterintelligence, CIA, or Secret Service. Doesn't really matter if you're part of Task Force Orange or the information support activity out of Fort Belvoir, or they've called it a lot of different names, Army of Northern Virginia. If you're a part of that, it doesn't really matter what your badge says. If you're a part of that secure access program, you're in the club, okay? Would Pete Strzok know where the weapons caches were in Kosovo? Yeah. What if you were trying to move the weapons caches from Kosovo to arm some warlords in Somalia? Wouldn't it just be a matter of Pete Buttigieg going to Kosovo and flying then down on a KS down to KS-50 in an Eclipse? In Eclipse Aviation, Akeem Al-Tepkin's plane. Remember, this is another DARPA plane that these guys are flying, this Eclipse Aviation plane. They've spent $500 million in DARPA for electronic warfare, EW, to defeat NATO radar. There's no way that they would know that the weapons were being moved from Kosovo to then being moved in, let's say you were going to do a campaign like Arab Spring. Wouldn't it make sense that when Peter Strzok came back in power, he would bring his cronies in? And remember, Buttigieg gets brought in with no training as a lieutenant. And all of a sudden now Buttigieg is in Africa and Kosovo, right? Wouldn't it make sense that that would be the most likely thing? If you're about ready to do a war and you're based in an intelligence analysis place, wouldn't you have to find and fix the target before you finish the target? Wouldn't it make sense that you would be at a drone base, like let's say Djibouti, which is a drone base, or Camp Fort Huachuca, which is a drone base? Would it make sense that you would want to do flyovers near a border area to take out the border defenses? Isn't that exactly what happened in Tobruk from Egypt? Isn't that exactly what happened on the border of Tripoli from Tunisia? Wasn't there also a southern prong coming up from Uganda, coming through Sudan and Uganda? Wasn't there also a southern prong there? Wouldn't it make sense that you would take money that was intended for Afghan and Pakistan, and then you would basically leave breadcrumbs and say, oh, Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden has left. Al-Qaeda has left Afghanistan and they've gone to the Horn of Africa. Why do you have them go to the Horn of Africa? Because Osama bin Laden was holed up in Sudan. Why do you have them go there? So you can cache weapons there, so you can divert money there. And we're not speculating that money was diverted there. We know it's diverted there, right? We know the contracts. We're actually going through the contracts of the Iraq Reconstruction Fund. Everybody I've seen in all these trials, the only thing that I see in all these Manafort trials, Flynn trials, of all these people, Papadopoulos, Carter Page, all these sagas, the only thing that I see is weapons brokering. Papadopoulos, weapons brokering. Page, missiles, weapons brokering. Mike Flynn, Task Force Orange, encrypted phones. Paul Manafort, weapons brokering. It's all weapons brokering, right? It's all about all the people. The Faruqi trial that I went to, all about diversion of weapons. They were supposed to go to Afghanistan. Where did they end up going with Faruqi and Anham? They still have the contract, by the way, for Afghanistan, Pakistan, after diverting our weapons for our soldiers and food and trucks through Bandar Abbas, an Iranian Revolutionary Guard port, okay? Remember how closely associated Faruqi was with the DNC? We're not guessing. We know that the Afghan reconstruction was diverted there. We know the Iraqi money was diverted there. If you don't believe me, in my 3 years of reports, well, guess who just came out and agreed with me? The head inspector general for Iraq, a guy named Sopko, just came out and said, oh, by the way, 85% of the money was diverted. Huh. I would imagine if he's the special investigator general, the SIGAR, S-I-G-A-R, if he's the special investigator, wouldn't he know? Wouldn't he know if the money was diverted or not? Why is he saying 85% of the money was diverted to the Horn of Africa? Right? Why is he saying that? I'm not saying that. I was for 3 years, but now he's agreeing with me. Why is he saying it? Because it was. Okay? So sometimes, and this is interesting because this guy, Ken Hale, is the country leader, the top diplomatic guy from the military in the relationship with Djibouti, which is really super interesting because they had a secret drone base in Djibouti. It was one of the, and you have Pete Buttigieg running around with General Dunford, right? 4-star baby. And now he's running the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That's numero uno, right? We're not talking about somebody who's kind of a bit player here. And they developed the MQ-21, or RQ-21, sort of marine vertical takeoff, vertical takeoff, not vertical takeoff, but like Jeep launched drone. It's about the size of a Jeep. I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of drone in this story. There's an awful lot of drone, and there's an awful lot of people like General Atomics and these cutaway businesses like General Carter Page is doing. That just seems to be the double dip. It just seems to be everywhere you turn, the reconstruction money is being diverted, and these little cabals, small cabal, not a big group of people, are basically creating these little companies and using these Imran Awans to basically take down the contracts. So we're gonna just leave it right there. The only thing I'm gonna say is I was just completely right on Nate Kane. Nate Kane came out and said, I'm a courier, I'm a courier, I'm a courier. If you didn't know it already, I'm a top secret courier. I have a code name. I worked at the FBI building. I'm an FBI employee. And I've been running documents up to Capitol Hill from the FBI to a guy named Derek Harvey on Nunez's staff for years. So it's like, okay, well, if I needed stuff couriered between Peter Strzok, okay, we know he's getting leaks every day with top secret information, and the FBI, he's at the FBI from Capitol Hill. We know the leaks happened. I don't know. Nate Kane, you want to add anything to that? So, Ken, I'm not involving you in this in any way, but I do find it's interesting that you're firing torpedoes for Pete Buttigieg. You saw me produce the fit reps that said he was in Africa and said he was going to Kosovo, okay? So you know that, and you know I know that, and you know you're not going to get away with this. So you better come up with a new story. You guys better put your heads together and come up with a new story. Because right now, all I see is a bunch of co-conspirators, and I see you, maybe you got a contract to say, just do some disruption. You don't know why, but I think I know why they hired you, if they hired you for this. They don't want this story told. They don't want this diversion of money. Hey, just take one guy, the guy, General Kelly, who starts Flynn Intel Group, or the lawyer for Flynn Intel. He's building a hotel in Baghdad, folks. How many people do you know with Iraq reconstruction money? They needed a new luxury 5-star hotel. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. It's feather bedding to the degree that you can't believe it. Knights of Malta is obviously the first familial connection. If you look at it, how many people do you know? Walk down the street one day and ask everybody you know. How many people do you know that have a hyphenated name? Not that many. How many do you know who the first name is Mifsud? That's pretty rare. If you were in Malta, not so rare. There's a ruling family of Malta for a long time. But then after the hyphen, add Buttigieg, another ruling family in Malta for a long time. But there's not a lot of Mifsud-Buttigiegs running around, are there? But yet, we have a Mifsud Buttigieg in the family tree of Pete Buttigieg in Malta, and his dad's from Malta. We know he's from Malta. Are we have him playing soccer in Malta? Are we sure that he wasn't involved with Christopher Steele, with another, supposedly not the same Buttigieg, not the same Mifsud, but another Mifsud who ran soccer for Malta. You know, Christopher Steele, you remember Christopher Steele? He was the guy who ran the whole red card takedown along with Mike Gaeta, all the same people that are going after Trump and doing the takedown of Trump. That's interesting. Another guy named Mifsud on Malta that runs the soccer team, but not the same Mifsud as the other guy who's running around doing the spy schools all over the Mediterranean. That's interesting. I think as this thing unwinds with Christopher Steele, you're going to see that this whole thing for the last 20 years has been, probably the last 50 years, has been playing the U.S. and Russia against each other, with the pivot point and the teeter-totter being Cambridge and MI5. And it's sort of a troika of these three different intelligence agencies at the very top. You know, the Richard Dearloves, the Andrew Woods, the Christopher Steeles, and so forth, and just playing the two against each other. And the cool thing about being the fulcrum point is at MI6, you only need a fingertip on either side of two great powers. Two 300-pound people on either side of the teeter-totter. You only need to apply the smallest pressure to make world events go in either direction you want. That's the role I think Christopher Steele is playing right now. And again, they just informed Bernie, you're being hacked by the Russians. Well, let's see, who ran the Russia desk for Cambridge Analytica and Orbis? Christopher Steele. We know his wife's first wife's father was a Russian scientist. We know he's had all these connections to hire all these people out of the old Russian defense industries to put into joint venture industries down in Ukraine. These things, how many people do you know? How many people do you know got married in Ukraine, okay, to Russian wives, and do the Cossack dance? They do the Cossack dance at their wedding, a Ukrainian Cossack dance. I don't know that many people who do Ukrainian Cossack dances. Are we sure Christopher Steele doesn't know how to hire people from the Russian intelligence agencies and plug them into joint ventures in Ukraine? There's a lot of money, remember, coming from the United States. We get $17.5 billion in every IMF tranche. There's another $1.7 billion in every USAID tranche to Kolomoisky, right? We better have some Cossack dancers around here, kind of like the Nowruz Foundation up in Washington, D.C. Everybody in our story also seems to be getting their, if they can't get their Knight of Malta from Casamini and the Nowruz Foundation, they have to go for this baby Knight of Malta thing but the Nowruz Foundation with their dancers on the steps of the Treasury building. They've been doing this ever since 2009. This is the Arab Spring. All of these programs, all the takedowns were in a notebook with 7 operations that David Petraeus had that he somehow lost to Paula Broadwell. He left it underneath the desk and she got all 7 plans. But the first one was Libya. You've heard different generals talk about this. First one was Libya. Next one was Syria. Next one was Sudan. Next one was Yemen. And the final one was Iran. They took those plans, they took those books. David Petraeus says they were top secret plans, and he left them out for Paula Broadwell, right? That's what was being executed. And before you do that, you have to move the weapons. You have to move the weapons into a forward position. Before you do that, you have to survey. You have to find and fix Task Force Orange. You have to find, that's Peter Strzok, that's Mike Flynn. You have to find and fix the targets. You can let the Jamokes, or the Indige, they call it, the indigenous people, do the finish. If you give them the right missiles and you give them the right codes, if you're Dmitry Alperovich and you give them the right codes, you lock on for them. All they have to do is push the button. And that way you have deniability, right? We'll find it for you. We'll fix it for you. And we'll teach you how to fly the drone. When we get it right there when it's in the crosshair like that, you go like this, right? That way we can say this is a Somali war, or this is the Egyptian war, or Egyptian war would be good. Or this is a Libyan war. You know, there's a civil war going on right now in Libya. This is happening still right now in Libya. Libya is in full flight civil war right now. And this is a way to be, hey, we're just providing intelligence. We're just providing intelligence, even though they armored up the RQ-21 missile. Again, Sounds like missiles. Sounds like Cruz and Associates missiles, right? Why is Peter Strzok selling cruise missiles? Why is he selling Oshkosh super Humvees? Why is he selling Excelis night vision goggles? All out of Minnesota. It just seems like pay to play to me. Just seems like pay to play to me. Seems like he's trying to take a sponge and take every penny of Iraq construction money and do some kind of side business, some kind of pay to play. And the same thing for the Iraq money and the Afghanistan money. And I say, when this thing is all said and done, it's going to be struck in Iraq. That's where he speaks the Farsi. Remember, that's where Club K is. It's going to be Buttigieg in Afghanistan.